tonight. As the desert wind whispers through forgotten tombs, I will take you back to the golden sands of ancient Thebes, to a world of papyrus scrolls, sacred ink, and secrets that could topple kings. Let me tell you the story of Khay, the boy who learned to write in the shadow of pharaohs. In the southern reaches of Egypt, where the Nile bends gently near the city of Thebes, a boy once knelt beside the riverbank, tracing strange symbols into the wet mud. His name was Khay, and he was the son of a humble brickmaker whose hands were always crusted with clay and whose back bore the weight of half-built temples. Khay, however, was different. He had slender fingers, a quiet stare, and a dangerous curiosity about the ink-covered men who passed through the streets of Thebes, the royal scribes, while other children chased fish in the shallows or played wrestling games beneath the palm trees. Khay watched the scribes. He saw how their white kilts never touched dirt, how they carried reed pens tucked behind their ears like golden scepters, and how even temple priests lowered their voices when a scribe entered the room. They didn't raise their voices or swing. Whips, they didn't have to. Their power lived in scrolls, in seals, and in words that could rewrite the fates of men. Khay's fascination began with a broken shard of pottery. One day, while fetching water for his mother, he stumbled across a discarded ostrakhan, a piece of limestone covered in faded hieroglyphs. He brought it home like a sacred relic, holding it with reverence. That night, he sat under the flickering oil lamp and traced every curve of the strange figures with his finger. A bird, a line, a coiled rope. He didn't know what they meant, but he knew they mattered. By age 9, Khay had begun to copy the symbols onto scraps of bark, bits of pottery, and even the walls of their mud brick home. His father, though skeptical, said nothing. But one morning, the boy's strange habit drew the attention of someone unexpected, an overseer from the temple of Amun. The man had come to inspect a new kiln when he noticed the symbols scrawled near the doorway. They weren't gibberish. They were remarkably precise, even elegant. The overseer asked who had written them. Khay stepped forward with his head down, expecting punishment. Instead, the man simply nodded and said, "The House of Life has room for boys like you." The next week, Khay was taken from his home and led through the grand gates of the Per Ankh, the House of Life, an elite scribal school attached, to the temple. The sandstone corridors were cool and dark, covered in carvings that whispered the stories of gods, battles, and dynasties long gone. It smelled of ink, old papyrus, and oil. For Khay, it was like entering the afterlife while still breathing. The instructors were severe men with calloused fingers and eyes that missed nothing. Discipline was sacred. Mistakes were met with lashes or long hours spent copying the same line 100 times. The reed pens were not toys. They were extensions of the soul. Each student was taught to grind their own ink from soot and water, to cut their own papyrus, and to memorize the sacred forms of over 700 symbols. Grammar wasn't optional. Accuracy was law. In the first month, Khay learned the basics: how to draw the ankh of life, how to distinguish a determinative from a phonetic sign, and how to identify different names of gods. But beyond the symbols, he began to learn something more subtle: how writing controlled truth. One day, his instructor erased a student's work and rewrote it slightly. "Now the Pharaoh wins the battle," the man said. "This is what he will want the gods to remember." That lesson never left him. He spent the next 3 years inside the Per Ankh, rarely seeing his parents. They were proud, but distant, unsure. How to speak to a boy whose world now included divine language and royal archives. Khay no longer played in the Nile. He learned to speak the names of the dead, to write spells for the afterlife, and to document the flow of taxes from 100 villages. Each scroll he copied was a map of power: who ruled, who paid, who lived, and who disappeared. One quiet evening, Khay was told to follow his instructor into the central library, a vaulted chamber beneath the temple filled with scrolls bound in leather cords. The air was thick with the dust of centuries. There, his instructor handed him a small roll of papyrus sealed with red wax. "This," he said, "is a record of a priest's sins. He thinks it's been destroyed. You will copy it, but never speak of it. If you fail, you will not leave this room." Khay did not breathe for the next hour. By the age of 15, he was allowed to carry the royal seal, to write decrees in the name of the Pharaoh, and to sit at the edge of court hearings, silently recording the words of generals and viziers. He learned how to make silence feel heavier than shouts. He saw how the truth could be written backwards, sideways, or hidden in the margins. He saw men fear the papyrus more than the sword. He had become what he once admired and feared, and yet, even as his hands moved swiftly across the scrolls, a question remained in his mind. Who writes the truth when the scribes are the ones who decide it? That question would one day change his life. But for now, he was still just a boy from Thebes, with ink on his fingers and the Pharaoh's future in his hands. Tonight, as the moonlight spills across the Nile like molten silver, let me take you deeper into the life of young Khay. No longer a village boy, but a student of ink, breath, and memory. Tonight, we learn what it truly meant to write for the gods, not with voice, but with the reed and the scroll. In the House of Life, the art of writing was more than memorization. It was a ritual. Words weren't merely shapes. They were containers of breath, and breath, the Egyptians believed, was life. To write was to summon the living presence of what you named. That's why each lesson began with silence. Not casual silence, sacred, stillness. Before the first stroke of ink touched papyrus, students were made to sit in meditation, their legs folded, hands open, as if they were priests preparing for sacrifice. The master scribe would walk among them barefoot, carrying a small dish of incense, letting the smoke coil around their faces as he whispered, "Ink is divine. The reed is its messenger." Khay's first task was not to write, but to make his tools. He was sent to the reed marshes at dawn, where the air was thick with mist and crocodiles slept between shadows. The chosen reed had to be firm, green, and flexible. Too soft, and it would split. Too hard, and it would gouge the papyrus. The older students taught him how to cut it at an angle, then trim it into a sharp nib using a flint blade. There was reverence in this process, as if crafting a sword from wood and time. Next came the ink, always black for sacred texts, red for dangerous words, names of demons, omens, or curses. The ink was made from soot collected from temple lamps, ground with gum and water into a thick paste. It stained everything it touched. The smell was sharp, earthy, a scent Khay would associate with fear and power for the rest of his life. Each scribe carried a palette carved from wood or ivory with 2 wells for each color. It was not unusual for a palette to be passed down through generations, like a family heirloom. Then came the scroll itself, papyrus, the pride of Egypt. It was harvested from the marshes near the delta, where the tall stalks grew as high as a man. Workers peeled thin strips from the plant's core, soaked them, and pressed them in alternating layers. Once dried, the sheets were polished with stones until smooth enough to glide beneath the reed's tip. But the surface still fought back. Every sheet bore the faint resistance of the plant it came from, as if it remembered what it once was. The students practiced by copying proverbs, fables, and hymns again and again. "Do not trust the lazy man," Khay wrote 100 times. "The god Thoth sees all lies," he wrote 100 more. Their fingers cramped, their eyes blurred. The ink stained their fingernails so deeply it seemed part of their flesh. One student collapsed from exhaustion during dictation. The instructor said nothing. He simply stepped over the boy and kept reading. There were no mistakes. A single slip of the pen could shift a name from blessing to blasphemy. Khay once wrote the sign for Ra, the sun god, with the wrong tail stroke. He was beaten with a split reed and told to copy the Book of the Dead from memory. It took him 11 days, but when he finished, the instructor held up his scroll and nodded. "This," he said, "is not writing. It is resurrection." As Khay advanced, he began learning the art of spacing, of placing words in the correct alignment with the gods. Left to right for the mundane, right to left for the sacred, columns for funerary rites, rows for temple records. The direction of a single bird glyph could signal life or death. It was not just calligraphy. It was magic, the hidden architecture of meaning. One morning, the students were led to a sealed chamber deep within the House of Life. It was known as the Hall of Breath. Inside were scrolls that no longer existed in the outside world, rituals for healing the soul, forbidden prayers, letters written by pharaohs now erased from history. The students were not allowed to touch. They were only to watch, to witness, as the master scribe unrolled each scroll with a reverence normally reserved for mummies. Khay's breath caught in his throat when he saw the writing. Not crude, symbols, but lines so precise they looked carved by light itself. "This," the master whispered, "was written by the scribe of the 4th dynasty, over 1,000 years ago, and it still speaks." It was then Khay understood. Scribes did not serve kings. They served time. They preserved memory, rebuilt reality, and bound the present to the past with ink. A pharaoh could command armies, but a scribe could make him immortal. That night, Khay couldn't sleep. He sat by the small window of his dormitory, reed pen in hand, staring at the stars above Thebes. He thought of the dead kings sleeping beneath pyramids, their names still whispered only because some scribe, long forgotten, had written them down. He looked at his ink-stained fingers and felt a shiver run through him. One day, he too would write a name that would outlive its owner. One day, he might choose which names were remembered and which were not. And so, with steady hands, he picked up a new sheet of papyrus. In careful strokes, he wrote 3 words in black ink: his own name, the year, and a vow. "I will not forget." Tonight, as the stars shimmer above the ancient sands and the wind sighs over broken obelisks, let me take you back to the House of Life, to the blistering courtyards where young scribes were shaped not by kindness, but by fire, dust, and repetition. This was where Khay truly learned what it meant to carry the weight of words under the cruel sun of Thebes. Each day began before dawn. The bells rang through the temple corridors, sharp and cold. The students, barefoot, sleep-stung, and silent, filed into the outer courtyard where long stone benches waited for them like rows of judgment. There was no time for food or greetings. The instructors were already there, standing like statues, in white linen, holding bundles of blank papyrus and baskets filled with reeds. Overhead, the sky turned slowly from indigo to blood orange as the sun climbed, merciless and unblinking. "Begin," one voice called. No lectures, no explanation, just one word. The first lesson of the day was always the same. Copy until your hand breaks, then switch hands. Khay dipped his pen into the black ink pot, his fingers still sore from the day before, and began to write. Line after line, word after word, proverbs, praises, proclamations. Each sentence repeated until it bled into the next. Sweat beaded down his forehead, dripped onto the scroll, and blurred the ink. One mistake meant starting again. "You are not writing to be read," the instructors often barked. "You are writing to become the pen itself." The heat rose quickly. By mid-morning, the papyrus grew brittle in their hands. Flies circled, backs ached, but none dared stop. One boy fainted once. The master walked over, kicked dust on him, and said, "Let the gods test your endurance, or leave." There was no sympathy in the House of Life, only standards. Beyond transcription, there were drills. The students were forced to recite long genealogies of pharaohs from memory. If even one name was skipped, they were struck across the knuckles with the flat of a reed. Some wept quietly into their robes, others bit down on their tongues and kept going. Khay soon learned that the true enemy was not pain, but pride. Pride made your hand tremble. Pride made you believe the gods would forgive sloppy glyphs. They did not. On the 5th day of the week, the scribes were taken to the temple colonnade for composition trials. These were different. There were no models to copy, only spoken dictation from the priest scholars. They would stand at the center and recite phrases from sacred texts, spells from the Book of the Dead or Laws of the Land. The students had to write as fast as they heard, no second chances. It was here that the real divisions began. The weak fell behind. The best rose quickly. Khay struggled at first. His hand was fast, but his hearing slow. He would miss a word, then panic, then lose the next sentence entirely. After one failed trial, his instructor looked down at his papyrus and said quietly, "A broken word is a broken oath." That night, Khay didn't sleep. He returned to the empty courtyard with a stolen candle and copied from memory every glyph he could recall. He wrote until the candle sputtered out and the moonlight became his only lamp. He didn't stop until he could hear words and see them instantly, feel the shape of the ink before it touched the scroll. By the 3rd month, Khay's name was being whispered. "The boy from Thebes, he can write without listening twice." A senior scribe even paused behind him during practice one morning and muttered, "That one will write for Pharaoh." But the praise came at a cost. Jealousy bloomed among his peers. His ink pot was tampered with, watered down until the strokes bled. His scrolls were swapped. One boy even accused him of stealing a sacred copy. The instructor didn't investigate. He simply made both boys kneel in the sun for 3 hours without shade, holding their palettes aloft. Khay's arms burned, but he didn't lower them. One afternoon, during the lesson of forbidden glyphs, signs only permitted in religious or royal scrolls, Khay noticed something. One of the glyphs bore a mark he'd never seen, a small diagonal stroke inside. The eye of the falcon god Horus. He asked about it. The instructor narrowed his eyes and replied, "That mark is not taught. It is remembered." From that day forward, Khay began to keep his own notebook, secret, hidden in a crack behind his sleeping mat. He recorded everything the masters didn't say aloud, variations, exceptions, edits in the margins of sacred scrolls. In time, this collection would become more valuable than any lesson he'd received, but also far more dangerous. Toward the end of the year, the students were given their first scribe's trial, a full scroll to compose, unaided, recounting the reign of a past pharaoh with proper dates, battles, blessings, and offerings. It had to be flawless. The trial took 9 days. Khay barely ate. He ground his own ink, cut his reed pens fresh each morning. He wrote with the discipline of a priest and the fear of a servant. On the final day, as the sun began to set, he delivered the scroll with shaking hands. His instructor did not read it at once. Instead, he held it to the light, feeling its weight. Then he unrolled a portion, examined the spacing, and said, This is the kind of writing kings want carved into stone." Khay said nothing, but inside, he felt something dangerous stir Not pride, but purpose. He was no longer a boy from Thebes. He was a scribe, one of the few who could shape what would be remembered and what would be forgotten. And the gods were watching. Tonight, beneath the endless sky that once watched over pharaohs and plagues alike, let me take you to a storeroom filled not with gold or scrolls, but with something far more valuable in ancient Egypt: grain. For tonight, young Khay, no longer merely a student, will face his first true task as a royal scribe, and it will test not just his ink, but his soul. The morning of his first assignment began without fanfare. A senior instructor simply approached him during dictation, placed a rolled scroll into his hands, and said, "The temple granaries await. You will count, you will record, and you will not speak unless spoken to. Errors are punishable by lash, or worse." Then the instructor turned and left. Khay's heart thundered in his chest. He clutched the scroll, a copy of inventory orders from the high priest himself. It was nothing like the rituals or ancient poems he had copied 100 times in the courtyard. This was real, a record with legal weight, a document that could trigger punishments, demotions, or worse, an audit from Pharaoh's tax scribes. He was escorted across Thebes by a temple guard, his reed pen and ink palette secured in a linen pouch, and his bare feet dusty with the rising morning heat. The streets buzzed with life. Merchants yelling, donkeys braying, incense curling through the market air. But Khay felt none of it. His mind repeated numbers, symbols, ratios, measurements of grain by the hecat, by the sack, by the cubit jar. The granary was a squat sandstone building on the temple's western edge, guarded like a treasury. Because in many ways, it was one. Egypt's true wealth didn't glitter. It fed. Grain was currency, sacrifice, survival. Whoever controlled it, controlled power. Inside, the air was thick with dust, sweat, and the heavy scent of dry wheat. Dozens of laborers moved between piles of barley and emmer, carrying baskets, shouting counts, arguing over spilled sacks. A plump overseer in fine linen approached him, eyeing his small frame and ink-stained fingers. "Another baby, scribe," the man grunted. "Try not to faint." He shoved a clay tablet into Khay's hand, the previous count. "Your job is to compare, update, correct. No embellishments, no cleverness. The gods don't care if you're poetic. They care if a priest goes hungry." Khay bowed slightly and moved to the nearest pile. He began counting aloud, not for the workers, but to anchor his own thoughts. 3 sacks, 4 half-sacks, 2 cracked jars, all marked down in careful, rows of glyphs. He checked for temple seals burned into each sack. A missing seal could mean theft. A cracked jar might mean rot. Every number had to align with the priest's ledger. After the first hour, he was sweating through his robe. By the third, his back ached and his fingers cramped, but he pressed on. At midday, a worker accidentally bumped him, splashing water onto a page. The ink ran. Khay's breath caught. A full line vanished. He redid the section from memory, then cross-checked the counts. Twice. By late afternoon, he found the first discrepancy. One record stated there should be 49. Sacks of emmer wheat in storage room 3. He counted 47. He checked again. 47. He paused. Was he wrong? Had 2 sacks been moved or stolen? He summoned the overseer, who scowled and stormed into the storeroom. "Check again," the man barked. Khay did. Still 47. The overseer waved. Him off, grumbling about lazy carriers, and walked away. But Khay noticed a sack at the back, covered by cloth, unsealed. He uncovered it. Wheat. Fresh. Unmarked. This was not part of the temple store. He scribbled a notation into the margin. Unsealed grain found, likely unrecorded. He added no accusation, just the facts. When he submitted the scroll at sunset, the overseer barely glanced at it until he reached the note. His eyes narrowed. He didn't say a word, but his hand gripped the scroll tightly before walking off in silence. Khay returned to the House of Life that night with his robes soaked in dust and sweat. He was exhausted, too tired to eat. But as he collapsed onto his mat, something unfamiliar stirred in his chest. Pride, not arrogance, but the quiet pride of surviving the fire. The next morning, the master scribe summoned him. The scroll lay on the table between them. "You wrote no lies," the man said. "You wrote what was. That is the mark of a scribe, not to please, but to preserve." Then he slid a new palette across the table. It was ivory, not wood, its surface polished smooth. Khay blinked. "This," the master said, "belonged to a scribe who now writes only for the dead. It's yours." Khay accepted it with shaking hands. From that day forward, the other students looked at him differently. Not as the boy from Thebes, not just as the fastest hand, but as someone trusted to carry the truth and survive the burden of it. And as the sun set over Thebes once more, Khay sat by the temple steps, his new ivory palette in his lap, and wrote in the back of his secret notebook, "The gods do not count only the grain, they count the hands that count it." Tonight, as jackals cry beyond the desert cliffs and the moon casts long shadows across the ruins of forgotten palaces, I will take you deep inside the temple walls, to a chamber sealed by time and fear, where a boy named Khay first touched power that should never have been his. For tonight, ink meets secrecy, and secrecy, danger. It began with a summons, not shouted in the courtyard, not posted on a slate. A whisper, delivered by a silent temple runner before sunrise. Khay, still rubbing sleep from his eyes, was told, "Only this. The archivist requests your hand." That meant something very specific. Not your presence, not your mind, your hand. It meant they didn't want questions. They wanted your precision, your silence. Khay followed the runner through a maze of narrow corridors, past prayer chambers and statue halls, until they reached a door he had never seen before. Unlike the other thresholds, marked with gods or proverbs, this door bore no inscription. Only a wax seal, thick, red, and imprinted with a falcon clutching a scroll. The royal seal. The runner knocked once, then left. A few seconds passed. The door creaked open. Inside was a man Khay had only heard of in whispers, the chief archivist of the House of Life, known only as Sahur, a thin, pale man with sunken cheeks and eyes like dried ink. He gestured without a word. Khay entered. The chamber smelled of old papyrus, copper oil, and something older. Mildew, perhaps, or secrets long sealed. Scrolls lined the walls in tightly bound bundles, some blackened by time, others wrapped in silk. The light came from a single brazier near the floor, casting flickering shadows on everything. Sahur sat before a stone table. On it lay a scroll, with broken ties, unsealed, unread, or perhaps read by someone who should not have. "You will recopy this," Sahur said, voice like dust. "Do not change a word. Do not ask what it means." Khay looked down. The scroll bore no temple header, no dedication to a moon. Only a series of numbers, names, transfers, and beside them, symbols he'd never been taught, bent forms, half-familiar glyphs twisted in unnatural ways. He swallowed. He nodded, took out his ivory palette, mixed fresh, ink, and began. Line by line, the scroll revealed something strange. It didn't speak of gods or rituals or Pharaoh's glory. It listed quantities, but not grain, not gold, people, names of workers, locations, mentions of northern labor. Camps and quarry expeditions under seal. Then another phrase. Deaths not to be recorded by temple scribe. Khay's hand froze. He waited, but Sahur said nothing. His eyes were closed, his hands folded. Khay continued writing. By midday, his scroll was complete. He rolled it tightly, tied it with black cord, and dipped a small tablet into the wax pot beside him. When he pressed it onto the scroll's edge, the wax cooled into the shape of the falcon seal. And just like that, Khay had sealed a royal scroll, something only a dozen men in all of Thebes were allowed to do. Sahur took it from him, held it, then looked up. "You saw nothing," he said. Khay nodded. But inside, something shifted. A quiet terror, a realization. Some scrolls didn't record history. They erased it. That night, Khay returned to his dormitory, but sleep would not come. His fingers itched. His mind replayed the twisted symbols. He opened his hidden notebook and, against his better judgment, sketched the strange glyphs in a corner, just once. The next morning, a guard appeared. Not a temple servant, a royal soldier. "You're to come," he said, and nothing more. Khay's legs felt like water. His breath caught in his throat as he followed the man through the temple gates, past the statue of Thoth, past the stone lions, and into the Eastern Archive Vault, a place even many scribes had never entered. Inside waited Sahur again, but this time the air was colder, the brazier unlit. The scroll from yesterday sat unrolled on the table. Sahur pointed to a mark. "You copied this glyph in the wrong direction," he said, his voice dead flat. "In this context, it changes sealed order to open order." Khay's mouth dried. His stomach turned. I thought I followed." Sahur raised one hand. "Do you know what happens?" he asked. "When a scroll meant to be hidden instructs a camp to act openly." Silence. "Nothing," he said, "because I caught it." Khay nearly collapsed in relief. Sahur leaned forward, voice now sharp. "This is your only mistake." He rolled the scroll, burned the faulty copy in the brazier, and dropped a single phrase as he turned away. "Next time, it is not inqui correct." Khay bowed, trembling. But as he walked back to his chamber, another feeling joined the fear. Power. Because in that moment, Khay knew he had held something darker than secrets. He had touched the machinery behind the illusion of Pharaoh's order. And he had survived. Back in his cell, he opened his hidden notebook one last time that night and wrote, "There are rooms in this world where even the gods fear to tread. I have been in one. Tonight." As silence cloaks the palace walls, and the scent of myrrh lingers where crowns once rested, I will take you into the breathless corridors of power, the court of the Pharaoh, where voices carried like blades, and a single word recorded in ink could alter the destiny of empires. Tonight, young Khay will learn that the sharpest weapon in Egypt was not the spear, but the whisper. He was summoned with no explanation, only a royal mark pressed into the corner of a slate and handed to him by a stone-faced guard. No scribe his age had ever been called to court directly, and as he followed the armored men through the columned avenues of Thebes, a slow pressure built in his chest. He passed lines of servants scrubbing limestone floors until their hands bled, priests blessing incense, nobles in gold collars arguing beneath palm-shaded arches. But none of them mattered, not in this place. The royal court lay behind towering doors inlaid with lapis and obsidian, guarded not just by soldiers, but by silence. As Khay crossed the threshold, he was struck by how quiet it was. Not peaceful, calculating. Here men did not raise their voices. They lowered them so others would lean in and become complicit. The chamber was vast, but every detail was deliberate. A mural of Pharaoh smiting enemies stretched along one wall, while the opposite side depicted him feeding the gods. mercy and vengeance painted in equal beauty. Cushions were arranged for advisors, viziers, and officials, their ranks clear by their distance from the dais. And there, seated upon a golden throne raised 2 steps above all others, was Pharaoh. Khay did not lift his eyes too quickly. That was a mistake young scribes often made, to look too long. Pharaoh was not a man, but a living god, and staring too directly could be taken as arrogance. So Khay bowed deeply, waited for the signal, and approached only when a vizier snapped his fingers once. A low table had been prepared. Fresh papyrus, soot ink. His own ivory palette had been cleaned and laid precisely. A roll of string was placed beside it, to bind what would soon become a permanent record. Khay knelt, straightened his back, and touched pen to scroll. What followed was not a speech, nor a ritual. It was a council, the gathering of Egypt's ruling minds. One by one, generals, architects, priests, tax officers, and foreign emissaries took turns stepping forward, speaking softly, measured, and always with one eye on Pharaoh's reaction. They did not speak truth. They danced with it. Khay's job was not to transcribe their exact words, but the official version of them. As taught, he filtered flattery from policy, omission from command. A general asked for more grain for the Nubian front. The scribe beside him recorded it as Pharaoh magnanimously increases supply to secure southern loyalty. A priest suggested lowering temple taxes. It became, in his infinite wisdom, Pharaoh recognizes the people's devotion and responds. The art of scribing in court was not just precision, it was translation, from ambition into immortality. But Khay noticed something that day. While Pharaoh said little, his silences were louder than thunder. A furrowed brow meant hesitation. A gesture to his ring meant approval. A long pause before a scribe began writing meant something should not be written at all. He watched the senior scribe, a bald, expressionless man with a scar across his temple, delay his writing for half a beat after a certain noble spoke. And sure enough, when Khay looked back at the ray scroll, that part had been shortened, sanitized. The actual suggestion was gone. By midday, the chamber grew warmer. The candles flickered. The incense burned low. Still, the meeting pressed on. At one point, a dispute arose. 2 officials accusing each other of misreporting labor tallies from the Delta quarries. Voices rose slightly. The atmosphere cracked. Then, Pharaoh raised one hand. Silence. He turned toward the scribes. "The scroll," he said, his voice as calm as the Nile before a flood, "shall contain the names of both men. Their accounts shall be reviewed. One speaks falsehood. The gods shall decide." Khay's reed pen trembled as he wrote the names. Not in dry ink, but in red. He had never done that before. Red was for danger. Red was for the condemned. When the session ended, the vizier dismissed the court with a nod, and Khay remained kneeling. As the room emptied, his legs were numb, his fingers ached, but his mind was alive with the weight of what he had seen. These men ruled cities, commanded armies, shaped the temples of gods, yet none of them could write their own legacy. That was the scribe's burden, the scribe's privilege. As the senior scribe approached, Khay expected dismissal. Instead, the man said only one sentence: "Return tomorrow." Then he was gone. That night, Khay sat beneath the courtyard fig tree, staring at the scroll still warm in his lap. He had been inside Pharaoh's court. He had written words that would echo into eternity. But he had also seen something else, the crack beneath the gold. He opened his hidden notebook and wrote, "Power does not roar in court. It whispers, and the scribe must hear what is not said. Tonight." As the torchlight flickers against sandstone walls and distant drums echo from temple processions, I will tell you not of glory, nor of learning, but of danger. For tonight, Kay will witness what happens when ink betrays its master. When a single stroke, too long or too short, carries a man from life into legend or oblivion. It began with a name written slightly too soon, on a scroll meant to remain blank for one more day. The day had started like any other. Kay arrived at the inner scriptorium, where elite scribes prepared reports for the palace and temple lords. The air smelled of crushed myrrh and wet soot. Scrolls lay stacked in ordered bundles, their cords labeled with red symbols: trade, military, treasury, punishment. Kay had been assigned to assist scribe Menkow, a man known for his flawless penwork and cold detachment. He was precise to the point of obsession, and yet that very morning, Kay noticed his hands trembled as he cut a new reed. They were working on a scroll of land transfers, a routine assignment documenting temple acquisitions from retiring nobles. It was dry work, but required careful attention. Names, dates, boundaries, all had to be correct. One misplaced sign could cause lawsuits, or worse, the wrath of the temple treasurers. Around midday, Menkow paused, looked over his shoulder, and then leaned in to whisper. "This," he said, pointing to a line, "is not to be written yet. The high priest hasn't confirmed it. We wait until the seal arrives." Kay nodded. But something strange happened. When Menkow stepped away to speak with the overseer, a younger assistant scribe, eager, nervous, and clearly new, glanced at the unfinished scroll, saw the blank line, and in an effort to impress, filled it in. He wrote the noble's name, the wrong name. When Menkow returned and saw the scroll, he went pale. "Who did this?" he asked, voice low, almost hollow. The assistant scribe stammered, pointing at the ink still wet. It was the obvious entry. Menkow didn't respond. He simply rolled the scroll, tied it, and walked out in silence. By evening, the temple bell rang 3 times. That never happened. 3 chimes meant judgment. The scribes were gathered in the courtyard. The high priest himself appeared, flanked by soldiers and palace guards. The scroll was unrolled before all. "This," the priest said, "was submitted this morning with the royal courier. It names Lord Anan as surrendering his western estates. Lord Anan is very much alive, and very much not surrendering his estates." Murmurs rose. The priest raised a hand. The Pharaoh's court read this and assumed rebellion. "An inquiry has begun. Lord Anan's house is under watch." He turned to Menkow. "You submitted it. You sealed it." Menkow bowed. "The seal was mine, but not the word." "Then whose?" The assistant stepped forward, stumbling, terrified. I thought..." The priest said nothing. He simply gestured. 2 guards seized the boy. His reed pen clattered to the stone floor. Kay's breath caught. The boy was younger than him. "Tomorrow," the priest said, "the record will be corrected. But Pharaoh cannot afford scribes who act before the gods speak." That night, the assistant was taken to the lower chambers. No one saw him again. The following morning, a new scroll was distributed. One every scribe was made to copy by hand. It was a warning. It began with a single line, in red ink. "One wrong word can burn a house." Kay copied it 3 times before. The meaning sank into his bones. That evening, he walked the edge of the Nile alone. The waters were calm, but he felt the storm under their surface. For all his training, all his precision, he knew one truth now more than ever: the scribes. Hand was not a hand. It was a blade, and when that blade slipped, even once, it could kill. Back in his chamber, Kay opened his secret notebook, hands trembling slightly. He wrote only one sentence that night. "Ink is not black. It is blood in disguise. Tonight." As the last embers of day sink into the sands and the statues of ancient kings cast their silent gaze upon the world, let me tell you a tale buried not in scrolls, but in stone. For tonight, Khay, scribe of Pharaoh, servant of silence, will stumble upon a message no one was meant to see, and everything will change. It began in the Valley of the Nobles. Khay had been assigned to accompany a team of priests and stonemasons documenting the restoration of tomb inscriptions along the cliffside. The mission was ordinary: review old glyphs, record what time had worn away, and ensure that noble titles and genealogies were properly preserved. It was dusty, hot, and utterly unglamorous. Most scribes avoided such field work, but Khay had accepted the assignment without protest, in part because of his growing unease inside the palace. Ever since the assistant's disappearance, the scriptoria had grown colder. Eyes lingered longer. Conversations trailed off when he entered. He needed distance. The cliffs offered it. For 3 days, Khay worked beside the masons, crouching by fading walls, matching the old symbols to their modern counterparts. He copied, compared, corrected. Some names had crumbled. Others had been adjusted in generations past. Political edits now fossilized in limestone. But on the 4th day, something unusual caught his eye. He was in the tomb of a minor, official, a man named Heba, advisor to a long-dead vizier. The tomb itself was plain: one central chamber, simple scenes of offerings, cattle counts, and funerary prayers. But near the innermost wall, half covered by collapsed rock, Khay noticed something strange: a row of glyphs carved sideways. Not a line to any normal reading pattern, not decoration, not a blessing, a message. Khay brushed away the dust. The letters were old, uneven, clearly carved in haste. But the content chilled him. They lied. The vizier lives. This tomb is a mask. Tell no one. The gods do not forgive twice. His hand froze. The vizier, alive. This tomb, a mask? What did that mean? Was it metaphor? A warning? Or something worse? An erased history? Khay looked around. The others were busy re-inking a doorway scene. No one had noticed. He copied the message quickly into his hidden notebook, covered the wall again, and said nothing. That night, he could not sleep. His mind spun with questions. Why would someone carve such a message in a forgotten tomb? Who was it for? Who buried it? And if it was true, if the official honored in the tomb had not truly died, but been erased, hidden, what did that say about the records Khay had been trained to trust? The next morning, he returned to the site early, before the workers arrived. He uncovered the carving again, this time scanning the wall above and below. Then he saw it. Another line, fainter, deeper in the stone. The real tomb lies beyond the false door. A false door, of course. Most noble tombs included symbolic false doors, carved panels representing the passage to the afterlife. They were never meant to open. But in rare cases, Khay examined the panel on the southern wall. It bore the standard prayers, the offering table, the depiction of the dead man seated before food. But there, at the edge of the frame, a fine groove, not chisel marks, a seam. His heart pounded. He pressed gently. Nothing moved. But the stone was hollow. He tapped, confirmed it. He didn't dare go further. If the priest saw him tampering, he would be accused of heresy or grave robbery. So he stepped back, carefully restored the dust and rock to its place, and rejoined the group. But all day, the message whispered in his mind. They lied. The tomb is a mask. That evening, he wrote in his notebook until his fingers ached. He didn't just transcribe the secret glyphs. He redrew the false door, the tomb's layout, and even estimated how deep the hidden chamber might lie behind. He told no one, not even his instructor, not even the archivist, because by now, Khay understood something he hadn't dared to believe before. Some truths were not forgotten. They were buried, on purpose. And now, he held one of them in his hands. As the stars emerged above the cliffs of Thebes, and the winds howled softly through the canyons of the dead, Khay sat alone in the sand, looking at his fingers. These were the fingers that could write Pharaoh's decrees, correct temple accounts, or unlock secrets never meant for. Light. He dipped his reed in fresh ink and wrote just one line. Stone remembers what scrolls are paid to forget. Tonight. As the moon glides silently above the Theban cliffs, casting long shadows across the resting places of kings and servants alike, I will lead you into the sacred silence of the necropolis. For tonight, Khay, once a mere student of scrolls, will walk among embalmed gods and learn that not every truth in Egypt was written with ink. Some were soaked in resin and blood. The assignment came without warning, as most dangerous things do. Khay was pulled aside by a senior priest at the House of Life and handed a sealed message, not a scroll, but a linen-wrapped shard of fired clay marked with the emblem of Anubis, the jackal-headed guardian of the dead. No words, just a symbol. That alone told him where he was going, to the Wabet, the purification chamber deep in the necropolis, where embalming took place. He had heard whispers about it for years. Students spoke of bodies drained and stuffed with natron, of sacred knives that must never touch the ground, of rituals so secret that even priests spoke them with lowered eyes. But no scribe from his class had ever been summoned there. Until now. He was taken across the Nile at dusk, ferried silently through lotus-lined waters. The sun died behind the hills as the boat approached the western cliffs, where tombs yawned, like mouths and statues stared endlessly at the horizon. The city of the dead, they called it, a place where time curled into itself, and names were carved not to be read, but remembered by gods alone. 2 priests met him at the landing, veiled, silent. They led him down a winding path of limestone steps, through torchlit tunnels and narrow doorways carved into rock. The air grew thick, not just with the scent of oil and dust, but with something heavier, the presence of death, not rot, not decay, but the sacred weight of the dead still watching. The Wabet was unlike anything Khay had seen. A sunken chamber, its floor painted with symbols of protection, its walls covered in black stars. In the center lay the body, a noble woman, wrapped in linen but not yet sealed. Her mouth was open slightly, her eyes were covered with amulets of lapis and gold. Beside her, a high priest stood holding a blade of obsidian, chanting softly. Khay was shown to a low bench. There, a blank scroll had been prepared for him. Fresh ink. A reed pen, already trimmed. His task was simple: record the ritual. But nothing was simple in the city of the dead. The high priest began by addressing the 4 sons of Horus. One by one, their names were intoned, their symbols traced in the air, with ash. Khay's pen followed, recording every phrase, some in formal hieroglyphs, others in the more fluid, hieratic script used for speed. Then came the removal of the organs, not with haste, but with song. Each step, each slice, each offering was part of a choreography older than any living man. The stomach was placed in one jar, the intestines in another. The heart, strangely, was not removed. That was rare. The priest paused, nodded toward Khay, and simply said, "Write that the heart remains. By her request." Khay's pen trembled. A noble who requested her heart be left inside? Why? It defied the standard funerary texts. The heart was weighed in the afterlife. To keep it in the body was risky. He did as instructed. The ritual continued. Incense was burned in rings above the corpse. Natron, the sacred salt, was poured over the limbs. The brain was removed through the nose using a hooked tool. That part, Kay had heard rumors about. But seeing it done, seeing the priest gently twirl the hook, then tilt the skull so the fluid drained into a jar, nearly broke his composure. He kept writing. Hour after hour, the ritual unfolded. Spells were read aloud. Some Kay recognized. From temple training, others he had never heard. Forbidden incantations. One included the phrase, "Let her sleep beneath the veil of Ra's hidden eye." That wasn't standard. He looked up, just once, and caught the priest staring at him. Not a threat, a warning. He looked back down and kept writing. Toward the end of the night, when the body had been wrapped, painted, and sealed with resin, the final rite began. The opening of the mouth, a ceremony meant to restore speech and breath to the deceased in the afterlife. The priest used a ceremonial blade shaped like a fish's tail and tapped it lightly on the lips of the linen-wrapped figure, chanting the words, "May you speak before the gods. May you breathe the truth of the sky. May your voice call for justice against those who wronged you." Kay froze again. That last line, it wasn't in the standard form. Justice against those. Who wronged you? He glanced at the scroll and wrote the words carefully, almost reluctantly. When the ceremony ended, the priests began extinguishing the lamps. One approached him and placed a small object in his palm, a flat clay token, shaped like a scarab. No words, just a gesture. Then they motioned him out. He walked back up through the tunnels, scroll held tight against his chest. The air outside felt strange, too light, too free. Like the world above had forgotten what lay below. Back in his quarters, long past midnight, he laid out the scroll and reviewed it. So many phrases, so many choices, most of them known only to the dead and the divine. But one thing remained sharp in his mind. The woman had wanted her heart kept. She had wanted to speak. She had wanted justice. And Kay, her scribe, her witness, had written the very words that would accompany her spirit into eternity. He opened his notebook and, by candlelight, wrote his own line beneath the others. In the city of the dead, some still scream, but only scribes hear them. Tonight. As distant music echoes from half-forgotten temples and the scent of blue lotus rides the warm wind of Thebes, I will tell you of celebration and illusion. For tonight, Kay, by now no longer a novice, will witness a truth. The gods never intended mortals to see, that even holiness can be edited. The festival of Opet was the grandest of all in Thebes. It stretched across 27 days, a procession of color, sound, and spectacle. Priests carried statues of Amun, Mut, and Khonsu from Karnak to Luxor in gilded barges, while dancers and musicians filled the streets with rhythm and scent. Crowds cheered, offerings overflowed. It was said that even Pharaoh smiled during Opet, for it was not just a festival, it was a reenactment of creation, of divine renewal. Pharaoh, through Opet, was reborn in the eyes of the gods, and every word of it had to be written. Kay was selected to be part of the scribal team that would document this year's festival. Not just the events, but the declarations, speeches, and sacred omens that would become the official record. He felt honored. At first, he arrived at Karnak before dawn on the first day, as incense was still being laid before the sanctuary doors. The master of ceremonies handed him a set of sealed scrolls and said, "These are last year's records. Use them as your foundation. Adjust as needed." Adjust? That word haunted him the entire morning. As the boats were anointed with perfumed oil and the high priests began chanting, Kay took his place among the royal scribes near the first pylon. His reed pen moved quickly, capturing each ritual in sequence. The lifting of the god statue, the laying of flowers, the lighting of torches. But then something strange happened. During the second procession, a group of porters stumbled. One of the sacred barges bearing the figure of Khonsu tilted suddenly. The statue wobbled and a golden mask fell to the ground. A collective gasp rose from the crowd. The priests froze, but only for a moment. The high priest stepped forward, lifted the mask with reverence, placed it back, and raised his arms as if it were part of the ritual. "The god sheds his old face," he cried. "A sign of renewal." The crowd cheered again. Khay glanced at the master scribe beside him. The older man simply continued writing, unfazed. Khay hesitated, unsure whether to record the stumble or the divine renewal. The older scribe leaned over and whispered, "We write what Pharaoh once remembered, not what the crowd saw." That evening, Khay reviewed the template scroll. It had a section marked in red. The god's face gleamed anew in sunlight, a sign of divine favor. The event had already been pre-written, or anticipated. On the fifth day, rain fell suddenly. A brief storm scattered the crowd and extinguished some ceremonial fires. Several omens were canceled. The high priest reordered the sequence. Khay waited, unsure whether to mark the break in ritual, but again, the master scribe overruled him. The scrolls must reflect favor, not interruption. Omit the rain. Khay began to understand. The scrolls weren't recording the festival. They were scripting it. Day after day, this pattern continued. A priest fainted from heat, recorded instead as entering sacred trance. A fight broke out among merchants near the temple steps, erased entirely. A foreign emissary was booed by the crowd, rewritten as greeted with quiet awe. By the 10th day, Khay no longer asked questions. He simply wrote until the 15th. That day, as the grand procession crossed the avenue of sphinxes between Karnak and Luxor, Khay noticed a group of scribes huddled near the rear. Not official ones. Not temple scribes. These wore no seal. They were copying quickly, not with care, but with hunger, as if trying to catch something others had missed. Khay approached them later that night, under the colonnade shadows. One of them looked up. "You're with the temple," he said flatly. Khay nodded. The man pulled a scroll from his pouch and handed it to him. "Here, this is what really happened today." Khay unrolled it. There, in hurried but legible lines, were accounts of the crowd's anger when temple food ran short, of the chaos near the eastern gate, of soldiers pushing back citizens who had waited days in the heat. "But why?" Khay asked. "No one will read this," the man smiled. "We don't write for Pharaoh," he said. "We write for truth." Khay didn't sleep that night. He lay beneath the stars, staring at his hands, the same hands that wrote divine laughter among the people, while knowing they had wept. The next day, he returned to the master scribe with his scroll. "Shall I omit the shouting again?" he asked. The man looked at him for a long moment, then said, "Write it, but write it softly." Khay didn't understand. "Write that the people cried out for more blessings," the man clarified. "It says everything and nothing." That afternoon, Khay stood at the edge of Luxor Temple as Pharaoh appeared, flanked by priests and guards. The crowd knelt. Trumpets sounded. The ritual was perfect. But Khay watched the faces, tired, hopeful, broken. And for the first time, he wondered what would happen if a scroll one day told the truth and someone read it. That night, in his hidden notebook, Khay wrote, "The gods may never lie, but their servants write in riddles." Tonight, as whispers curl like incense through marble halls and shadows stretch long behind gilded curtains, let me take you into a game without pieces, a war without blood. For tonight, Khay, the scribe of silence, will learn that in Pharaoh's palace, ink is not just memory, it is weaponry. It began with a letter, not from a priest or a master scribe, but from a noblewoman, Lady Neferhotep, wife of the vizier of grain and wine. The message was wrapped in silk, sealed not with wax but with perfume, and delivered in secret by a handmaid to the scriptorium's back door. Khay was summoned immediately by the palace archivist. "You will assist Lady Neferhotep with the composition of a family decree," the man said. "You will write what she asks, but speak of it to no one." He nodded. He had heard her name many times. Known for her sharp wit, silver tongue, and veiled threats. It was said that her words had more power than her husband's entire retinue. To be called by her was either an honor or a trap. He was escorted to her estate that evening, through arched courtyards and gardens that smelled of honey and crushed citrus. She awaited him in a chamber lined with papyrus scrolls and ivory-capped jars. Her dress was sheer linen, embroidered with lapis and gold thread. She did not rise when he entered. "You are Khay," she said simply. He bowed. "You are said to write without error, and more importantly, without memory." He said nothing. She handed him a draft. It was a will, or something like it. It transferred ownership of 3 vineyards along the Western Canal to her son, bypassing her husband entirely. The language was formal, but the intent was not. "Subtle. This," she said, "must be written as if the vizier himself ordered it." Khay hesitated. "It is not true," he said. She leaned forward. "It will be, once you write it." His hand twitched. "If this scroll is discovered," he whispered, "I will be punished, or worse." She smiled and placed a small obsidian scarab on the table. Its belly was engraved with the seal of the palace treasury. "You are not the only one who writes things that never happened." Khay understood. He wrote the scroll that night. Every word precise, the seal impression perfect, the ink dried with scented sand. And when he left, he carried with him not the scroll, but a bag of silver rings heavy enough to bend his conscience. Fee. Next morning, the vizier made a public announcement. He was retiring. His son would assume control of the vineyards. No one questioned it. The scroll was read aloud, stamped, and filed into the royal archive, and Khay watched it happen. He had not just written a lie, he had rewritten a life. That week, other requests followed. A military general who wanted an edited version of a failed campaign. A priest who needed a new record of donations, doubling their true value. Even a royal cousin asked Khay to help reword a decree of punishment into a spiritual retreat. The scribes whispered his name now, not in admiration, in caution. "He writes for anyone," they said, "even shadows." One evening, as Khay was preparing scrolls in the lower vault, a figure stepped into the torchlight. Scribe Sahur, the archivist of the House of Life. "I have read your latest work," Sahur said, voice flat. Khay bowed low. "The signatures were flawless," Sahur continued. "But the spacing gave it away. The original decrees you copied were written for justice. Yours were written for convenience." Khay said nothing. "Do you know what we used to do?" Sahur murmured. "When a scribe began writing more fiction than fact?" Khay's mouth was dry. "Erase him?" "No," Sahur replied. "We promoted him." Khay blinked. "Because once a scribe begins rewriting truth," Sahur said, "he becomes valuable. Not for what he knows, but for what he can destroy." He handed Khay a sealed scroll. Blank. "This is to be filled later," he said, "by you, with words that have not yet happened." That night, Khay returned to his chamber with the empty scroll in his satchel and a sick feeling in his gut. He stared at his reed pen, then at the pages of his secret notebook. He had once believed that scrolls were sacred. He now knew they were currency, and he was becoming very, very rich. He opened the notebook and wrote, "Truth does not bleed when cut, but it does fade, line by line, in hands like mine." Tonight, as winds hiss through the cracks of palace stones and jackals cry beneath a moonless sky, I will tell you not of what was written, but what disappeared. For tonight, Khay, the scribe of Pharaoh, the hand behind royal lies, will wake to a silence more dangerous than any accusation, the silence left behind when truth vanishes. It began with routine. Khay had spent the day transcribing edits to a series of land transfer decrees involving nobles on both sides of the Nile. 3 scrolls, sealed and stored. Nothing exceptional, or so he thought. The 3rd scroll, however, had weight far beyond what the surface revealed. It involved land once belonging to a disgraced noble executed 3 years prior, property that had been quietly redistributed to the temple. The scroll confirmed that transfer, but it also bore the name of a woman who was never supposed to appear in any record. Lady Khay had only heard the name once before, whispered in the palace kitchen in the same breath as the phrase, Pharaoh's shame. She had once been a concubine of the king, then vanished. No funeral, no tomb, no mention since. But her name was there. He had not written it. It was part of the master draft. But it was now in his ink, his scroll, his handwriting. He sealed it, logged it, placed it in the low vault with the others, and then, like any other night, he left the scriptorium in silence. The next morning, the vault was opened. 2 scrolls remained. The 3rd was gone. No break-in. No broken seal. No wax residue. Just absence, as if the scroll had never existed. Khay's blood turned cold. He didn't speak. Neither did anyone else. But the looks began. The vault keeper, the junior scribes, the archivist. No one said the word theft. Not yet. But it lingered in the air, coiled around every silence. By midday, Khay was summoned by Sahur. The scroll is missing, the old man said without preamble. I placed it in the vault, Khay replied, calm on the outside, burning inside. You signed the log. Yes. You remember its contents. I remember enough. Sahur leaned back. His fingers tapped once on the desk. There are 2 kinds of missing scrolls, Khay. Those that vanish because someone wishes them hidden, and those that vanish because someone needs them to be found elsewhere. Khay said nothing. Which kind was this? I don't know. Sahur's eyes narrowed. You will. That night, Khay returned to his quarters, but something was off. The reed pen on his desk was misaligned. The candle wick was trimmed, shorter than he had left it. And worst of all, his secret notebook had been moved. Not taken, not opened as far as he could tell, but moved. He lit a lamp, opened the pages, and scanned every line. Nothing missing, but one fresh ink blot, a thumbprint, faint, smeared near the bottom corner. Someone had touched it. Someone had seen his truth. He hid the notebook in a new place, inside a hollowed-out ink jar, buried beneath unused scrolls. Then he sat by the doorway until morning, heart pounding, breath shallow. At dawn, a courier arrived. No words, just a message wrapped in a crimson ribbon. No seal. He opened it. One line, write nothing today, no signature. He burned the message immediately. By mid-morning, rumors were spreading. A priest had been arrested. Some said he was caught smuggling temple scrolls. Others said he had information about a noble's secret property. Still others claimed he had been tortured for speaking a woman's name forbidden by decree. Khay said nothing, but in his gut, he knew. The missing scroll hadn't just been taken, it had been weaponized. Someone had stolen it. Someone who knew what it contained. Someone who wanted Khay to feel the walls closing in. That night, he visited the temple not as a scribe, but as a shadow. He moved through the lesser halls, through chambers of prayer and forgotten statues. And in a dusty corner near the chapel of Sekhmet, he found it. A whisper, a scratch on the stone, written in crude hieratic. She still lives. The dead do not. Sign scrolls. Khay stumbled backward. Who had written it? A rebel, a spy, or someone inside the palace itself? The scroll hadn't been forged. It had been bait, a test. He rushed back to his quarters and began copying everything he remembered from. The scroll, the dates, the seals, the names, especially Lady T's. The more he wrote, the more the ink felt heavier than before. That night, he didn't sleep. Instead, he wrote one final line in his hidden notebook. Truth disappeared tonight, but so did safety. Tonight. As the desert winds hush their breath and the gods turn their faces away, I will take you to the foot of the sacred obelisk. Not to worship, but to witness judgment. For tonight, Khay, the scribe who once merely recorded, will be forced to write the verdict of his own trial. It began at sunrise. A soldier knocked at Khay's chamber before the first light touched the temple spires. No warning, no summons scroll. Just a single phrase. Come, bring your ink. They marched him across the courtyard, past the colonnades of papyrus-shaped columns, past the stone lions, past the silence of scribes who turned their faces as he passed. In his hand, he carried only his reed pen, his ivory palette, and a single blank scroll. His feet were bare, his throat dry. The trial was to take place in the court of Maat, a sacred tribunal rarely used, reserved for offenses that stained not only the law, but the divine order. It stood in the shadow of the tallest obelisk in Thebes, a slab of granite that reached into the sky like a judgment frozen in stone. The moment he entered, he saw them. 3 high judges sat on thrones of alabaster, flanked by 2 priests of Thoth, their faces painted with ceremonial blue. On the lower dais stood Sahure, and beside him, unreadable, stood the scroll, the missing scroll, now placed in a clay box, sealed in red wax. Khay's heart thundered. A voice called out. Khay, scribe of the inner court, is summoned to give account for his scroll. Dated. Year 9 of the Pharaoh's reign, day 18 of Shemu, bearing the name of one Lady T, a name forbidden in royal record. He was motioned forward, but not to speak, to sit, to write. The trial would not be judged by words spoken aloud. It would be recorded by his own hand. A priest handed him a scroll. Begin, he said. State your name, your place, your role. Then write what you know. Khay. Swallowed hard, he began. He wrote his name, his title, his location. Then slowly, deliberately, he described the events. The day the scroll was composed, the moment the name appeared, his reaction, his decision to log it, his certainty that he sealed and placed it properly. He did not lie, but he did not tell everything. He did not write of the anonymous message. He did not mention the scratch in the temple wall. He did not say the notebook in. His chamber held the full transcription of the scroll. When he reached the part about the scroll's disappearance, he paused, then added, When I returned the next morning, the scroll was not in the vault. No locks were broken. I reported nothing. I feared being blamed. One of the judges interrupted. Why did you not speak? Khay looked up. Because in this place, silence is safer than truth. A murmur rippled through the court. One of the priests leaned toward Sahur and whispered something. The archivist said nothing. The trial continued. A witness was brought forward, the vault keeper. He testified that the scroll logs matched Khay's signature, that the seals were intact, that there was no evidence of entry. But he also said Khay was the last to touch it and the first to mention Lady T. The judges nodded. A second witness, a junior scribe, was more direct. He writes too quickly, the boy said, too confidently. We all knew something was strange about that scroll. Khay wrote all of it. Every accusation, every gaze. Then came the final moment. The box was opened. The scroll inside was blank. A collective breath held. No writing, no seal. Just an empty sheet of papyrus, yellowed with age. Khay stared in disbelief. Was it the real scroll? Or a forgery? A trap? One judge turned to Sahur. You presented this as the missing document. I presented what was recovered, he replied calmly. I did not say what remained. Then he turned to Khay. The scroll is gone. But the question is not where it went. The question is whether your ink poisoned it before it disappeared. The judges stood. Their decision was simple and terrifying. Khay is to remain under temple watch. He is not to write unsupervised. His scrolls will be reviewed. His movements noted. He is not convicted, but neither is he free. He was led away, not in chains, but in silence. Back in his quarters, a new scribe had already been assigned to share his chamber. His ink pots were replaced, his reed pens inspected. That night, he opened his secret notebook in the candle's half-light and saw a new line, not written by him. Just 6 words, in the corner, faint but deliberate. Truth fades fastest. In bright rooms, someone had entered again. Someone was watching. He closed the notebook, placed it inside the hollow ink jar again, and blew out the flame. And for the first time since he learned to write, Khay did not record the day. He simply whispered it to the dark. I was judged, but not condemned, which means someone still needs my hand tonight. As the breath of the desert stirs ancient dust from forgotten tombs and the stars blink like distant watchful eyes, I will lead you beneath the surface, not of stone, but of history. For tonight, Khay will dig not with hands, but with memory, searching for a woman the palace declared never existed, and discovering that some truths bleed even when buried. He could not sleep. For nights after the trial, Khay lay awake beneath thin linen sheets, listening to the shuffle of the second scribe's feet across stone, the subtle clicks of guards. At the gate, the slow, rhythmic drip of water echoing from a nearby basin. Sleep no longer came to him as it once had, soft and safe. Now every creak felt like footsteps. Every silence, a test, but one image would not leave his mind. Lady T. The name etched into that missing scroll. The woman who vanished without burial, without record, without trace, except for that line carved into temple stone. She still lives. The dead do not sign scrolls. It was not just a warning, it was a clue. Khay had learned long ago that when something was forbidden, it meant only one thing in Egypt. It was once powerful, and someone was still afraid of it. So he began, digging, not in earth, in archives. He volunteered for late copying shifts, requested to assist the priest librarians who maintained older dynastic records. Officially, he said he was studying scribal styles across reigns. Unofficially, he hunted for a name erased. In the Hall of Dust, the oldest archive beneath the House of Life, he found something. It was a list. A plain registry of names presented to the court in year 6 of the current Pharaoh's reign. On it were over 40 titles granted during a season of reward. Most had been logged in the Royal Chronicle, but line 37 had been crossed out, in red. The ink had not faded. It had been scraped off, but the scrape wasn't clean. Khay tilted the papyrus beneath a copper lamp and caught it. The faint trace of a glyph, a basket, a reed, a feather. She had been granted a title, then erased. He copied the line into his secret notebook. That night, he re-examined every mention of the land transfers he had handled before the trial. Several involved properties previously held by anonymous donors, a common euphemism for those removed from the record, but one detail stood out. A villa on the west bank, near the cliffside tombs, had changed ownership twice in the same month. The first scroll listed a false donor. The second replaced it with a priesthood. But the first scroll bore an odd phrase, transferred by divine order, by voice not to be recorded. That was no legal language. It was an erasure. He remembered the obelisk shadow, the scroll that vanished, and realized someone had tried to delete Lady Ty from memory by burying her inside process. Not Flame. But if she had been hidden, where? He. Returned to the cliffs of Thebes under the guise of helping with tomb restorations. A new team had been assigned to catalog forgotten chapels near Deir el-Bahari. Khay offered to document them. The priests accepted. He arrived with a fresh scroll, but in his satchel was the notebook. 3 days into the expedition, he found it. Not a tomb, a door, half sealed by sand, tucked behind a collapsed shrine. Unlike others, it bore no cartouche, no prayers. Only one mark, a faint glyph scratched at shoulder height. A single open eye. Not the eye of Ra, not the eye of Horus. An eye without owner. He waited until nightfall. Under torchlight, alone, he pulled away loose stones, brushed sand aside, and pushed. The door gave. Inside, darkness, cold, dust that clung like cobwebs. He stepped in. The chamber was small. No statue, no funerary bed. Just one stone bench and a recessed alcove containing a single sealed jar, and on the bench, a scroll, untied, unsealed. He lifted it with shaking fingers and unrolled it under the torch. The ink was faded but legible. It was not a will. It was not a ritual. It was a confession, written in Lady T's hand. She spoke of a child, born in secret, not of Pharaoh's blood but claimed as his, a political tool. She had been ordered to raise the boy in seclusion, to prepare him for a false ascension if needed. But something changed. A rival queen discovered the truth. T was declared dead in secret. The boy vanished. "I write this not to survive," she wrote, "but to remind someone, anyone, that I lived, that I did not consent, that I was erased to preserve a lie." Kay's vision blurred, his hand shook. He copied every line, then sealed the scroll again, placed it back, covered the door, and left no trace. When he returned to Thebes, he said nothing. But that night, he opened his notebook, and under the lines of court lies, land transfers, and trial words, he wrote, "Some truths cannot be rewritten. They must be re-exhumed. Tonight." As the walls of Thebes hold their breath beneath the weight of unspoken names, and the Nile slides silently past monuments built on memory and murder, I will tell you what happens when knowledge itself becomes a target. For tonight, Khay, the scribe who spent his life recording the lies of others, will find that his truth is the most dangerous story of all. It began with the feeling of being watched. At first, it was subtle, a lingering glance in the scriptorium, a pause in conversation when he entered the room. Then it became patterns. Scrolls he had arranged suddenly shifted on their shelves, ink pots slightly moved, his reed pen placed at the wrong angle. No one said anything. No one needed to. It was clear. Someone had been in his space, not to steal, to send a message. And one evening the message arrived as in his own handwriting. A single line, written neatly inside his secret notebook, which had been hidden in the hollow ink jar beneath 3 layers of blank scrolls. "You know too much." He stared at it for minutes, trying to convince himself that it was something he had, written in a daze, something forgotten. But the strokes were too smooth, too deliberate, not his. Not exactly, close enough to mock, far enough to terrify. The next morning he refused to write. When the head scribe assigned him 3 ritual summaries to be transcribed, Kay shook his head. "My hand is injured," he said. It wasn't, but the man didn't press him. That afternoon, a junior scribe offered him tea. He poured it out when no one was looking. That evening, he found the door to his chamber unlocked. Not open, not damaged, simply unlocked, like someone wanted him to know. He slept with one eye open. For 3 nights, Khay lived like a ghost in his own life. He copied nothing, spoke little. His fingers twitched at the memory of ink, but never touched it. And on the 4th morning, the summons came. No seal, no courier, just a single folded note beneath his mat. "The archivist requests your presence. Now." He knew what that meant. Sahur, the man who never asked anything twice. The high vault was colder than usual. The brazier had not been lit. The air smelled of mildew, dry scrolls, and a hint of oil. Sahur stood alone, fingers clasped behind his back, a box resting on the stone table beside him. He did not greet Khay. He simply looked at him and said, "So, you found her." Khay did not speak. There was no point denying it. Sahur continued, "Lady T has been a ghost for 9 years, a shadow erased from every court record, every temple scroll. And now, you've written her back into existence." Khay's mouth was dry. "Only in my notebook," he said. "I didn't." "You did," Sahur interrupted, quiet and calm. "You wrote, and that's all it takes." He opened the box. Inside was a scroll. Familiar. Too familiar. It was his, the one he'd copied by torchlight in the tomb. The one he thought no one had ever seen. "How?" he whispered. Sahur smiled faintly. "You're not the only one who knows where things are buried." He placed the scroll gently back into the box and shut the lid. "You are not being punished. Khay," he said, "you are being warned. What you know is not false, but it is not useful." Khay frowned. "Not useful to whom?" "To Egypt," Sahura replied. "To Pharaoh. To the gods who protect the balance. What purpose does truth serve if it breaks what holds the world together?" Khay's voice trembled. She was erased. "Yes," Sahur nodded, "because her existence was dangerous. Her child, if he still lives, is a threat to the throne. And her name, written by a scribe like you, becomes evidence. Evidence becomes gossip. Gossip becomes fire." Khay said nothing. Sahure stepped closer. "You are not the first to find something you weren't meant to find, but you may be the last, if you choose wisely." He opened a leather pouch and removed a new reed pen, perfectly carved. The tip gleamed slightly with oil. "Write again," Sahur said. "Return to the archives. Restore what we tell. Forget what you found." "And if I don't?" Khay asked. Sahur's voice didn't change. "Then I will not stop you. But I will also not protect you." He turned away. The conversation was over. Khay walked out of the vault with the pen still in his hand. That night, his chamber was darker than usual. The guards didn't check on him. The second scribe, the one assigned to monitor him, had not returned. His mat was cold, untouched. His ink pot had been replaced. A fresh scroll lay on the table, blank, waiting. And his notebook was gone. No sign of entry, no broken lock, just emptiness. He stood there in the dark for what felt like hours. Then slowly, mechanically, he sat down. He lifted the reed pen. He dipped it in ink. And, for the first time in days, he wrote, "I am still alive." Then he paused, looked at the scroll, and added, "But I do not know for how much longer. Tonight, as sand drifts through the crevices of stone like forgotten breath, and the stars above Thebes flicker like the blinking eyes of ancient gods, I will lead you beyond the walls, beyond the temples, beyond the safety of silence, into the desert, where confessions are not made to judges, but to the wind. For tonight, Khay will meet a man who once held the same pen and hear the truth that ended his voice. It began with a summons disguised as a favor. The chief scribe of the temple granary had fallen ill, and Khay was asked to accompany a junior, team delivering sealed inventory scrolls to an outer post along the desert trade route. It was a dull task, an errand for assistance, but perhaps that was the point. A way to move him out of the city, quietly, under the guise of service. He didn't refuse. By then, he had grown used to the feeling of invisible hands guiding his steps. The caravan departed before dawn. Just 5 men, 2 carts, and a string of tired donkeys. Khay rode in silence, the sun rising like a blade over the hills behind them. By midday, the heat shimmered along the sand like ghosts in motion. The further they went, the quieter it became. By late afternoon, they reached the station, a small outpost carved into the base of a cliff, with 1 water basin, a single shade canopy, and a guard who looked as though he'd been waiting for years. Khay stepped down and stretched his legs. A junior scribe handed the scrolls to the quartermaster. Everything was routine, except someone was watching him. A man, seated alone under the rock ledge. His robes were sun-bleached, his face aged, by wind and time. His left hand curled slightly, fingers rigid, a sign of old injury, but his eyes sharp, focused, the kind of stare only another scribe would recognize. The man beckoned. No words, just emotion. Khay walked over, sat down, waited. The man stared at the dunes, then finally spoke. "You're Khay, the one who wrote about her." The wind stirred, lifting dust between them. Khay didn't respond. He didn't need to. "I was like you once," the man continued. "A scribe, assigned to the royal household, trusted, obedient, until I saw something I wasn't meant to. Copy." He held up his curled hand. "They didn't cut it off. That would have made me a martyr. They just broke it. Slowly, quietly." Khay's chest tightened. "Why are you here?" The man smiled. "Because they needed me gone, but not dead. So they sent me here, where no one comes, where scrolls do not circulate." He leaned closer. "And because sometimes they need someone to talk to the next one." Khay's breath caught. "You were watching me." "No," the man said. "I was waiting for you." The silence between them stretched like shadow. "Lady T," Khay finally whispered. The man closed his eyes. "I knew her name before it was forbidden. I knew her voice. I copied her letters. I even wrote the order that removed her from the record. I didn't know what I was doing until it was too late." "What happened to her?" Khay asked. The man shook his head. "I don't know. I was sent away before the body turned up, if it ever did." "Then how do you know she's not?" "Because you found her name," the man interrupted. "And if her name survives, she does too." Khay looked down at his hands. The same hands that had written decrees, altered, records, sealed lies. "They'll come for me." "Yes," the man said. "Eventually." "What do I do?" "You have 2 choices," the man said. "You write what they want and live long, forgettable years, or you write what you've seen and live forever, but only in the dark corners of history." Khay was silent. "Choose carefully," the man added, "because once a scribe writes truth against power, he loses the right to rest." The sun began to fall, painting the desert blood orange. A runner from the caravan called Khay's name. "Go," the old scribe said. "Deliver your scrolls. Smile. Obey." "And then?" Khay asked. The man smiled. "Then write what they fear." As Khay walked back toward the caravan, his fingers trembled. Not from fear, from certainty. That night, back in the camp, he sat alone beneath the stars. He opened a new scroll, a clean one, untouched by the palace, unwatched by Sahur. And he wrote, "There is no ink black enough to bury what I now know. The truth has already been written, and this time it will not be erased. Tonight, as the moon climbs high above the sleeping columns of Karnak and the statues of gods lean in just a little closer to listen, I will take you not to a battlefield, not to a courtroom, but to a place more dangerous than both, a chamber, where truth is kept alive by silence, and death waits behind knowledge. For tonight, Khay, the scribe who now walks with one foot in shadow, will descend into the library no one speaks of, the one beneath the temple. The descent began in plain sight. 3 days after the desert confession, Khay resumed his duties. Quiet, cooperative, predictable. He returned to the scriptorium, copied ritual texts, assisted temple librarians, offered no resistance. And yet every scroll he touched felt like a lie, because now he knew where the truth might live. It had been whispered to him once, years ago, by an elder scribe. There is a second house of life, beneath the first, built for the scrolls. Too dangerous to burn. He had dismissed it then as myth. But myths, he now understood, were often just censored memories. His first clue came from a misfiled ledger. While assisting in the archive of burial inventories, Khay discovered a shelf of scrolls marked not by dynasty or temple, but by color. Crimson seals, each bearing a glyph he'd never seen in training, a closed eye inside a square. The scrolls were chained, literally. Iron links bolted them to the wooden beams. A priest caught him staring. "Not for scribes," the man said flatly. "Those are vault summaries. You're not ranked." But the warning told Khay something vital. They were real. The following night he returned, not through the main scriptorium, but through the priest's quarter, beneath the incense storerooms into the hallway that curved unnaturally west. There, behind a half-buried relief of Thoth, the god of writing, was a seam in the wall, barely visible, a pressure plate. He pressed. The stone moved. Cold air rushed from the gap like breath from a tomb. He entered. The stairwell spiraled down in silence. No torches, no guards, just a slope into blackness, the walls lined with smooth granite etched with curses, not for protection, but for deterrence. Let no unworthy eye see what is held here. Let the ink blind the liar. At the base of the stairs, the air grew thick, metallic. He lit a lamp. Before him stood a door of polished black stone. No handle, just one indentation, the size of a reed pen. He hesitated, then slid his pen into the slot. The door groaned and opened. The room beyond was colder than he expected. Not large, not grand, just rows and rows of sealed clay cylinders, hundreds, maybe thousands, each labeled in the same forbidden glyph, and above them, carved into the wall in gold-leafed hieroglyphs, the phrase, "Here sleeps memory, unedited." He moved slowly, scanned the labels. Some were familiar, old pharaohs, collapsed cults, temple treasons. Others bore names erased from all history. Then he found it. A cylinder labeled simply, Order 37, Year 6, Royal Household. He lifted it, heavy, warm somehow despite the cold. He cracked the seal. Inside a scroll, faded but legible. He unrolled it, read, and stopped breathing. It was the original record of the order of transfer, the one he'd seen edited months ago. But this version named Lady T not as a recipient, not as a threat, but as the author of the land transfer. It contained her handwriting, her seal, and more than that, a note, handwritten in the margin. This order was forced. I do not consent. May this record survive me. He sank to his knees. She had tried, not to escape, but to leave a mark. This wasn't a political document. It was a confession disguised as law, and it had been buried, on purpose. He returned the scroll. To its case, resealed it, and placed it back. Then, moving faster now, he found more. A trial record that never reached court. A death sentence scratched through, unsigned. A child's name with 3 fathers, none confirmed. All tied to T, all locked away. Khay did not steal any of them. He knew better, but he copied what he could, in tiny strokes, on papyrus hidden, beneath his robe. Not the full scrolls, just the truths between them. Names, dates, evidence. When he finally ascended the stairs, the air above felt different. Not warm, but false. Like a world pretending it had nothing to hide. He resealed the wall, returned to his chamber, sat in darkness, and opened his new scroll, the one meant for nothing. He wrote, "I have seen what they buried. I have touched what history tried to forget. And I now know the house of life is built atop a house of silence, tonight. As palace drums fall silent and temple bells toll a sound no scribe dares misinterpret, I will take you to the moment history cracked. For tonight, Khay, no longer a silent hand, no longer merely a recorder of lies, will witness the collapse of a throne, and with it, the return of everything that was buried. It began before dawn, with no fanfare, no omens, no thunder. Just a whisper passed through the temple corridors, like a breeze too cold for summer. The Pharaoh has died. 3 words, that was all. No scroll, no official, just air and fear. Khay was in the scriptorium when the first bell rang. Not the bell for prayer, nor for fire, but the single iron note that signaled endings. All scribes dropped their pens. Some knelt. Others stared blankly at their own unfinished lines. No one moved. Then the messengers arrived. Robes white, faces veiled, mouths tight. Orders were handed out. Every active scribe was to report to the Great Hall of Transition. There the rites would begin, the writing of legacy. Khay walked in silence, but inside his mind burned. The ice, Pharaoh dead? No illness had been reported, no omens observed, unless it had been hidden, or forced, or rushed. The Great Hall had been transformed. No longer a place of audience, it now held rows of tables, ink prepared, papyrus stacked like grain. Every decree the Pharaoh had made must be reviewed. His history must be rewritten, polished, sanctified. No mistake could remain. It would be Khay's job, and others like him, to make sure the Pharaoh entered the afterlife without blemish. But Khay did not write, not at first. He watched. The other scribes moved like priests, quiet, mechanical, obedient. Scrolls were scrubbed of scandal. Words like rebellion, dispute, failure were replaced with patience, negotiation, divine delay. Names disappeared. Others were elevated. And one name, T, remained absent, perfectly erased, as if her breath had never disturbed the air of the palace. Then the funeral orders arrived. Khay was assigned to document the procession of rebirth, the journey of the Pharaoh's body from the inner sanctum to the Valley of Kings. It was a task of honor, but also a risk, because this was the only moment when all elements of court and temple converged, everything visible, everything vulnerable. The procession began at dusk, torches lit, priests chanting. The golden sarcophagus borne on the backs of 12 men, flanked by guards and acolytes. Scribes like Khay walked behind, recording the incantations, the movements, the purity of the path. And there, standing among the outer watchers, he saw him, the old man from the desert, the one who had once been a scribe. Their eyes met. No signal passed. But it was enough. Khay knew what he had to do. That night, while the court feasted to honor the dead, Khay slipped into the temple archive, not the lower vault, not the sealed hall, the public record room, the place where scribes from all houses came to review royal documents. He carried with him a single scroll, not labeled, not signed, but inside it he had copied fragments, carefully selected lines, true lines, from the hidden library, from Lady T, from erased orders, nothing treasonous, just real. He placed the scroll not on the shelf, but within an official box, among the scrolls of the 9th year of Pharaoh's reign, a place where it would not be burned nor noticed. Not now, but someday. Someone would find it. Someone would read it. The next morning, the city awoke to mourning. Flags lowered, streets washed, doves released, but beneath the surface, new forces stirred. The air was not yet named. Advisors whispered, priests repositioned. And in that vacuum, Khay felt something rare, not fear, but space, possibility. Later that day, Sahur summoned him. No guards, no pressure, just a quiet invitation. "I heard your hand return to writing," the old man said. Khay nodded. "I wrote the procession." "And only the procession?" Sahur asked. Khay paused. "For now." Sahur looked at him for a long time. Then, to Kay's surprise, smiled. "Good." "Why?" Khay asked. "Because change is coming," Sahur said. "And when it does, it is better to have scribes who already understand where the bodies are buried." Khay said nothing. As he left the chamber, he passed by a new scribe being shown around, young, wide-eyed, eager, just like he once was. The boy bowed to him. Khay nodded back. That night, Khay returned to his chamber, closed the door, unrolled a clean scroll, and wrote, "The Pharaoh is dead, but his story is not. Somewhere beneath the lies it still breathes, and I have given it lungs. Tonight, as the candles flicker low in the corners of empty chambers, and the ink dries slow beneath the weight of memory, I will tell you not of kings or gods, not of laws or rituals, but of one man, a scribe, who dared to write himself into the silence. For tonight, Khay no longer copies. He no longer corrects. He writes, and the words are his own. He began the scroll long after midnight, when the rest of the House of Life was quiet, when even the guards had grown bored of watching his door. The flame from the lamp danced low, casting moving shadows on the blank walls. But the scroll before him was clean, fresh, wide. Not an official decree, not a temple ledger, just space, empty and waiting. He dipped the reed pen slowly, held it above the scroll, and paused. For years, he had written names that were not his, for men he had never truly known. He had recorded rituals he did not believe in, and burned copies of laws rewritten to please gods that no longer answered. He had written the truth and the lie. And now, with a single stroke, he would do what no scribe before him had dared. He would write himself. He started at the beginning, not of the kingdom, of the boy, the one from Thebes who had drawn birds, in the mud with sticks, who had watched the scribes walk past in silence and power, who had dreamed of one day being like them. He wrote of his selection, the fear and pride mingled together, the beatings, the sleepless nights, the calluses on his fingers, the long hours under the courtyard sun, the smell of ink and old sweat, the pride he had once felt when he first copied a decree in flawless strokes. He wrote of the vault, of Sahur, of the first time he saw a scroll forged to hide a name, The first time he was asked to erase a truth. The first time he was told that lies serve the balance. He wrote of the missing scroll, of Lady T, of the desert, of the old man with a broken hand, of the obelisk under which he was judged, of the blank scroll that told him everything he needed to know about power. He wrote of the forbidden library, of the original decree with her handwriting, of the child she bore and the title she never asked for. He did not use her name too often, not out of fear, but reverence. She had already lost so much. He would not take her silence too. He wrote of the night Pharaoh died, of how the city did not mourn, only rearranged itself, of how the truth was not buried with the king, but scattered in the hands of those too afraid to hold it. He did not spare himself. He wrote of the lies he told, the scrolls he signed, the justice he delayed. He wrote of the fear that had shaped his every movement until he met someone more afraid of forgetting than of dying. And when he reached the present, when his ink was nearly gone and his fingers ached, he wrote one final truth. I am not the Pharaoh's scribe. I am not the god's instrument. I am not the voice of the temple. I am Khay, and this is my scroll. He let the ink dry, slowly, deliberately. When the last word had set, he rolled the scroll with care, tied it with black cord, and sealed it not with wax, but with thread. No royal stamp, no temple glyph, just linen, simple, silent. Then he stood, dressed, took the scroll, and walked out of his chamber, out of the scriptorium, out of the house of life. No one stopped him. They were no longer watching. They had already decided what he would become, and he had decided what he would leave behind. As the first light of dawn touched the edge of the Nile, he crossed the river alone. The boatman did not speak. Khay did not look back. He walked into the western cliffs, toward the tombs, toward the places the city did not visit. There, among the broken chapels and half-buried statues, he found a niche, a hollow in the stone, long forgotten, already half swallowed by sand. He placed the scroll inside, covered it with a shard of pottery, and pressed his hand into the dust. Then he left, not as a scribe, not as a fugitive, but as someone no longer waiting for permission. That night, as stars bloomed above the desert and the world rolled onward without him, the scroll remained, unread, unclaimed, but real. And someday, someone else would find it and read the words of a man who once wrote the world's lies, until he finally found the courage to write himself, tonight. As the sands of Thebes cool beneath the gaze of ancient constellations, and the city breathes softly in the distance, I will tell you not how history ends, but how it survives. For tonight, there is no decree, no war, no throne. There is only a scroll that no one commissioned, that no priest blessed, that no court acknowledged, and yet it waits. And in that waiting, it lives. The scroll sits in silence beneath the stone, dry, wrapped, hidden in a hollow that even time forgot. Its linen tie has stiffened. Its edges have curled slightly with the shifting heat of countless suns. But its words remain, and though no eye has read them in many years, they are still there, still speaking. Somewhere beyond the cliffs, life continues. The scribes of the new Pharaoh write with fresh ink. The names change, but the rules remain. The temple still chants. The courtyards still echo with the sound of lessons repeated. And once in a while, a student asks, "Did scribes ever disappear?" And the elders say, "Some were exiled, some erased, some went mad from the weight of secrets." But no one mentions Khay. He is not listed in the records. His name appears nowhere official. His scrolls were reattributed. His final entries locked behind blank seals. But something strange happens. Occasionally, in the House of Life, a phrase appears on the corner of a student's draft. Not part of the assigned copy, just there. A line like, "Truth sleeps beneath ink," or "Silence is not always peace," and the instructors frown and say, "Where did you see this?" The student shrugs. "It was just there. I thought it was a proverb." In the western cliffs, wind shifts sand in slow rhythms. The stone hiding the scroll remains undisturbed. But if one were to listen closely, one might almost hear the faintest creak of linen giving way. Not breaking, releasing. As if the scroll knows its time is not yet, but not far. Somewhere, beyond Egypt, beyond the reach of crowns and seals, a reader is coming. Not a scribe, not a king. Just someone who still believes that memory has weight, that truth has patience, that words, once written, become more than ink. They become breath. Khay never returned to the palace. Some say he became a wanderer, living among laborers near the quarries. Others say he crossed the Sinai and lived among scroll makers in foreign temples. A few whisper he built a school in the desert, teaching the children of nomads how to write what they saw, not what they were told. But those are only stories. The scroll tells none of them. It ends with no flourish, no prophecy, no revenge. Only this. If you are reading this, then you too have written for someone else. Maybe today you write for yourself. The stars above the Nile continue their ancient arc, indifferent and eternal. The gods have long gone quiet. The kings lie buried beneath 1,000 curses. But one scribe's voice, the one who wrote, the lies, then the truth, then his own name, waits patiently beneath the stone. And someday, when all the loud stories have burned away, that whisper may be the one we still remember.